Welcome to Garden Plants with Jim Putnam. Let's talk Green Giant Arborvitae. This is Green Giant Arborvitae, a widely used screening plant that is very fast growing upright evergreen conifer. It's actually a hybrid between Western red cedar, which is not technically a cedar, it's Thuja plicata, which is a Western red cedar, and a Japanese Thuja. And it was developed in Denmark in like the 1930s and then introduced through the National Arboretum in the US in the 1960s, and has become a very widely popular, fast-growing evergreen screening plant for a lot of reasons. I think it probably gets a little bit big for most people's requirement, but it is fast growing, and folks that want that fast growing screen, I definitely understand the appeal. It doesn't off color as much as some other conifers. So typically in the winter time, you'll see, you'll see conifers go from, those bright green colors into some tans and kind of burnt orange colors during the winter time. It'll off color just a bit, but not as much as others. I started off in some typical 3-gallon size container Green Giant Arborvitae that you might find on a table in a garden center to purchase and bring home. Here's a few in the ground, and we're filming this a few days after Christmas, and you can see the color is slightly burnt orange. We've had some lows in the low 20s that have off-colored them just a bit. So that's about as off-color as you'll typically see Green Giant. Now they are hardy in zone 5. I'm going to say 5 to 8, but in areas of zone 9 that don't get it quite as hot, so in like Pacific Northwest, they'll probably be fine as well. So that, it's going to depend on where you are in the country as to whether they're hardy in zone 9, that kind of heat. In zone 5, they're probably, with some more cold on them, going to turn a little bit more of a burnt orange color than this. These are fast growing, but I have to say, on any of these videos I'm doing with screening plants, the main thing you need to know is if you plant that 3-gallon plant that I started in over there into the ground, that first year it's in the ground, it may or may not grow. Sometimes things hit the ground running, sometimes they don't. It's probably only going to grow about a foot in the ground that first year. That would be the best case scenario, and regardless of what size you initially bought them. But they pick up in speed over time and can go from 6 inches a year to a 1.5 feet to 3 to 4 feet in a single season once they're well established and they're on their way. And these can reach 40 to 60, probably even more than that over time, over a lifetime, in height, and 12 to probably as much as 15, 18 feet in width, depending on the space they have. These are planted about 5 feet apart. That's kind of, what people do with these kinds of things. They'll plant them 4 feet apart or 8 feet apart. Ultimately, they're going to obviously outgrow most spaces based on the height they get. This is my warning on these kind of large growing. These are pretty disease resistant and insect resistant and all those kinds of things. But my warning is once these get bigger than the space that you've allotted for them, how are you going to get them out in the future? It's very, very expensive to remove something that becomes this overgrown. Another thing with these, and just a couple warnings, because again, they're beautiful, they're fast growing, they're great screening plants. One other thing is they tend to shade themselves out down at the bottom over time. They have this perfect pyramidal habit, which allows a light to get down to the bottom of the plant, which you'll see in a lot of conifers that grow this way, and a lot of hollies and other screening plants. They tend to be broader at the base, which allows sunlight to hit them. But we tend to shear them a bit because we don't have 18 feet in width typically, unless you have a very large lot. So we tend to shear them off a bit. And that prevents the light from getting down here to the bottom. Like these are beside a road. He can't let them get out here in the middle of the road. So in the future, they're going to be sheared. And what's going to happen is, without light getting to these bottom branches, they're going to thin down here. And what I see is when these reach 25 feet in height, they're beautiful, spectacular plants, but you can see right through the bottom of them. So they become less effective as screening plants for 5 and 6 foot tall people, and become really good screening plants for 20 foot tall people in the future. So these are very soft to the touch, which is one thing we think about with conifers. Sometimes they can be a little prickly when you touch them. It has this scaly foliage on it. Again, typically is typically is bright green during the growing season, maybe a little off color during this time of year. They do develop a small cone. The fragrant is the foliage is fragrant if you break it, lightly fragrant, not as much as some other conifers. Most of the time for uses, these are going to be used as screening plants. I mean, they get big and get big quickly once they get going. Again, it can take a minute sometimes for things to really start to grow. That's going to be the primary use for them. But this would make a perfectly good specimen plant. If you had a large corner of your property, you weren't necessarily trying to create some sort of fence like these are going to be used for. You could absolutely use, one of these and plant it and, have a gigantic Christmas tree in the corner of your property somewhere. It can initially be grown in a container as a small container plant for a few years and then go in the ground. We do that a lot of times with conifers where we'll start with a very small plant and step it through a container and then put it in the ground later. You can definitely shear these and keep them slightly smaller. We've got a neighbor in the neighborhood who's been topping his for several years. He actually has been, just literally cutting the top out of them and keeping them around 10 or 12 feet. There's probably some sort of limit to that where the trunk is eventually going to look weird and it's not going to work as well for him. But in the meantime, he's actually, cut the top out of them and kept them sheared like that. Again, it's probably going to shorten the life of them in some way, but for most people, this is a plant with a 60-year lifespan. Most people are looking to screen something for the next 20 years in a house that they live in. So that's probably fine. The more sun, the better. The more sun, the fuller. They will take some light shade, but really the more sun you put this plant in, the fuller, more compact it's going to be. Moist, well-drained conditions. This is not a plant. Conifers are hard to trust for watering. You go into a long drought, these are not going to be very good at letting you know that they're dry. Like leafy plants, a lot of times the leaves are curl, tell you they're kind of dry. This is not going to do a very good job of that. It's going to start thinning in the middle rather rapidly to kind of balance itself from being dry. So this is a plant that if you go through a long period of a long drought, even well-established ones, you may want to address them during a long drought period and give them some extra water. Green Giant Arborvitae are pH adaptable, meaning they'll take a wide range of pHs. They're pretty soil tolerant. I mean, sand, clay, different types of soil. They just needs to be well draining. They do become pretty drought tolerant once well established, but again, I'm not going to trust them in any kind of severe drought at all. You definitely don't want any standing water around these at all. They are not salt tolerant, so that's something to that's definitely something to keep in mind. The planting distance is really going to be up to you on the height, the ultimate height that you're going to keep them. So again, I got a neighbor keeping his 12 feet tall and he's just topping them off. So he has his very close together. If you're going to allow them to get 20, 25 feet tall, you're going to want to space them further apart than that. So you can go, the spacing could be anywhere between 4 feet apart if you're going to keep them well sheared, up to 10 feet apart. If you're ultimately going to let them become very, very large trees. If your Green Giant Arborvitae are in good shape, typically they're pretty pest resistant. Again, as long as they're in pretty well-drained soil, there's not a lot of stress on them. You may see bagworms on stressed plants, but these tend to be more insect disease resistant and deer resistant than our native Thuja occidentalis, our eastern Arborvitae, for sure. But so, okay. You're putting this plant in and you're trying to get some growth out of it pretty quickly. You can fertilize these in the late winter, early spring. Typically we use an organic fertilizer on ours, but if you're trying to push them harder, I understand some folks are probably going to want to maybe use a synthetic fertilizer or something and try to get some additional growth out of them. Keep in mind, that's a stressful situation to put a plant under to put it in the ground and then 6 months later go, hey, let me see how fast I can make it grow. Even if you are going to try to speed them up with fertilizer in the future, you may want to let them get a little bit established for a year and a half in the ground and let them get rooted in and all before you start really hammering away at trying to make them grow super fast. Just throwing that out there, that typically in a nursery environment where we're really pushing plants is where we see lots of disease issues, insect issues. The plants are vulnerable. Although they look great and they're growing fast, we've put them under a lot of stress to try to push them that hard. So it's really best to put them in the ground, let them get established. And then if you want to, in the future, try to push them a little harder, you can fertilize them in the late winter, and then you could come back around at the beginning of summer and hit them with an additional fertilizer at that time to try to get them growing a little bit faster. Keep in mind, you want to make sure you don't allow a plant that you're pushing with fertilizer to get into a drought situation or anything like that. But I'm just throwing that out there. If you're trying to create a fast growing screen, that's kind of my process. Let them get rooted in, and then you could fertilize them twice a season if you wanted to try to get them to grow faster. This is a really low maintenance, overall low maintenance plant that put in the wrong place can become very high maintenance in the future. So if you put this plant that wants to get 40 to 60 feet, you don't think you're going to be able to prune it and control it in the future or hire somebody to do so, it can become an issue in the future. There may be better small screening plants for you to use than Green Giants. But if you're trying to make a really fast growing screen that can put a division, a wind block, something between you and a neighbor pretty quickly, this is a great plant for that. And definitely, I grew and sold lots and lots of these as a nurseryman, and there's a great reason why. I mean, every single one of them is like a clone of the next one. They're all just these little perfect Christmas trees that we can put in our gardens and make a neighbor go away kind of quickly. So this is Green Giant Arborvitae. Thanks for watching.